You're listening to The Power Project. I'm your host, Brandy Voth. I also like to think that I'm your guide along this journey of purpose, which is where you will hopefully end up at the end of this podcast. I'm a mom, a wife, a daughter, a friend, an entrepreneur, an advocate in the fight against human trafficking. I wear a lot of hats, y'all, but don't we all? And most importantly, I am passionate about inspiring women to go out and lead purpose-filled lives while owning your God-given power. I have this crazy belief that we are all better when we lift each other up, which is exactly why I created this platform to spotlight other women that are leading in ministry, business, and nonprofits in the hopes that you at home will be inspired by their stories to get up and take action in order to walk in purpose and own your God-given power. Without further ado, let's jump right in. Okay, you guys, welcome back to The Power Project. I'm literally on the couch today with Elisabeth Jordan, founder of The Human Impact. And thanks for having me down here. This is awesome.
I love that you came to meet us in Deep Ellum in Dallas, and then we got to just go a little south to the streets and spend time.
Yeah. So the Human Impact is an organization that works with street ministry, street outreach, in a relational setting, building relationships, just from what I'm gathering from my one day today of hopping in with you guys. And so I reached out to you. I first heard about what you were doing by the video about Bonton Farms. And I thought that was incredible. And I showed it to my husband and my kids, and I thought, man, I need to interview someone from this organization. But this podcast is a girls only club.
For good reason.
Yeah, well,
we need some clubs.
There's enough guys. Like, there's enough guys, right? Like, nothing against you guys. I love you, but this is a girls club. So I found, I looked up the Human Impact, and I'm like, oh, so she's the founder of that. And I did what I do best, which is shoot you a message, fall right into your DMs over on Instagram. And you guys had outreach today, so I was able to come down and see your organization in action on the streets with the people that you talk to week in and week out. And it was beautiful. Like, it really was. And there's well-meaning people in the world that are trying to do good, but missing literally the human piece that I think you guys bring to the table. And every single person that was here today doing the outreach, had a genuine interest in the person they were speaking with, whether it was someone that they see every week or it was someone they had just met today. You guys do a really great job of just building that bridge and building conversation, building relationship. So tell me a little about the Human Impact itself.
Sure. I think it's, what you hit on, the relational aspect. When I first started coming to the streets 6.5 years ago, I came with a lot of stereotypes and assumptions about people who were homeless. And very quickly, just as I was there on the streets, those assumptions got challenged. So like that people are lazy, just so many people who want to work and they have a part-time job and they can't get off the streets, or they have a full-time job that pays minimum wage. The idea that everyone was an addict, and just realizing there are some people who struggle with addiction, but that's by no means everybody. And so I had these assumptions that as I actually would humble myself and listen to people's real stories, what I started to realize is there are so many amazing people helping the homeless, food, shelter. There's a lot of services and programs. But what I kept hearing is that people were without these supportive long-term relationships that would be sort of like an anchor for them as they navigated a difficult system. And what I like to tell people is, think about the hardest place you've been in your life and then trying to get out of that space by yourself. And that's where so many people who are homeless find themselves, is they're in a really tough spot, and then they're trying to get out of this place alone. And so our mission was born from this need that I saw, which is truly a mission of friendship. And, you were with some staff members, but also some volunteers who come out with us every week. And so not only have the staff built these long-term supportive relationships, but we have volunteers who are invested in people and build long-term relationships like our friend Annalisa, who knows our friend Tony, who's homeless, and it was his birthday, but he doesn't really celebrate birthdays.
This is friend day.
Friend day. So she made him some pecan pie and had everyone sign a card. And what I love is that it's the creativity of so many people coming alongside a group of people who can be forgotten or misunderstood, and to truly love them in a human way, like you were saying. Just celebrating simple things like a birthday.
Yeah. Yeah, like I was there when saying happy friend day to him. and even though he didn't, doesn't celebrate birthdays, he was really excited just to share that moment with you guys. And I think he had a little bit of a blush that happened, but that was the takeaway that I had today was your staff has relationships with the people that your volunteers do. And I feel like it's just a matter of saying, I see you, right? I see you, I know you, I recognize you as a human being. And I was blessed by some of the conversations that I had today. How did this all happen? How did this all evolve?
How did it come to be in the first place?
Yes.
Well, it started when I lost my job. So I was working in the for-profit industry, and I was doing my dream job in the music and entertainment business, and I ended up unexpectedly losing that job. And I had been, or I guess I am still, although this work has worked it out of me some, but I'm type A, and I like to accomplish, and you got it.
Yes. Do you know your Enneagram number? You're a 1.
I'm a 1.
So I'm a 3.
Okay. Well, they're kind of similar.
But yeah.
In behaviors.
Is it a good thing? Is it a curse? I don't know.
Depends on the moment.
Yes.
And so, being in this place where I had lost my job, it was a place I never expected to be in. It was very humbling, and I didn't know how to get myself out of it. And I would say I had been really good at making plans, and so I was kind of in this empty space. And finally, after 6 months of being there, I actually asked God for the first time in my life. I asked him what his plans were for me. And I had truly never asked God. I'd never stopped to say, God, what are your plans for me? Which is funny because he made me. So you would think it might have crossed my mind before.
I get it 100%. I mean, and how old were you when
I think I was 27.
Okay, you were 27. It took me until 34 to be like, what? Hey, maybe I'm not running something. Maybe he has a better plan, right?
Yes. And I don't know, if he hadn't kind of stopped me dead in my tracks, I don't know that I would have asked that question. And so I came to him with open hands and really telling God, I'll do whatever you ask me to do. I just need some direction here. And the Lord spoke in different ways through some books I read, through some circumstances, and then specifically through this career coach that I had been working with. And he had asked me, and I think this is a really amazing exercise, but he had asked me to go back through my life and write down the moments, days, or weeks when I felt most like myself. And as we went through and talked about those, I talked about these mission trips to Peru I had taken. And basically he looked at me when I talked about these mission trips and said, you need to figure out how to do that here in Dallas. And as I sort of compared the two, in Peru, I felt like it didn't matter what I looked like or what clothes I had on, and I had grown up in a neighborhood where that mattered a lot. And on the streets of South Dallas, it was the same thing of I could just show up as me. And so when he said figure out how to do that in Dallas, some other things led me to the homeless. And I just noticed how they were similar in this way of I could really be myself. And so I ended up meeting with different people who were already in the nonprofit space here. I just wanted a job with one of them. And I ended up not getting some jobs I applied for. And I had told God I would consider doing something out of the box for him. And this man named Larry James had invited me to the streets because he was just handing out water bottles in July, which is super hot here.
Right.
So he had...
Which is and I always tell people, if you don't know what to do, if you don't know how to serve, put bottled water in your car and hand it out.
Because it's really easy and really necessary.
Yes.
You know it's going to be something that someone can use. So I showed up that day, and I didn't have expectations of coming back. It was very far outside my comfort zone. And at the same time that day, kind of what I was talking about, something came alive in me. And going back to that experience with my coach, the guy that was coaching me, just understanding like the Lord had put this in my heart. I just didn't know it. And so it didn't look like, oh, now I'm going to start an organization. It was truly just one step at a time of, okay, I'm going to keep showing up on Thursdays when he goes. And it kept growing in my heart. Instead of being sort of pulled away from it, I kept being pulled toward it. And the human impact came years later as I realized that it was going to need to be more than just me to really affect change. And we're very relationally driven, but we help people with all the practical steps as they want them. And so we help connect them to attorney resources, job resources, housing resources. And we have an amazing team now, 4 other staff members who work with me, and we can do so much more relationally, which is where it starts, but then practically as we walk that out with people.
And I think so often, right, there's all the stigmas, all the stereotypes, and what people miss is the fact that they're looking for a hand up, right? Not a hand out. Like they're literally looking for someone to come alongside. There are people willing to put the work in, just lacking resources. And how long has the Human Impact been an organization? How long have you guys been formed?
Almost 4 years, coming up this spring.
Okay.
So we've been acting as our own organization.
But you've been doing outreach for what?
Almost 7.
7. Okay, 7 years. What have you found? Because I have so many people that they can look at your point Z, or whatever point you want to put yourself out on the spectrum, right? They can look at it and they say, I want to do what you're doing. I love what you're doing. How did you get started? And I get asked this all the time about volunteering, mentoring, in whatever capacity I'm serving. What's your answer? What's your answer for someone that says, like, I want to do what you're doing, I don't know how to do it?
Specifically with homeless, or just starting something that you feel called to?
Either way, whatever you want to speak to there.
I think when people ask me or like think I'm far along this path, and as though it's been easy or was obvious, I just would say it's the complete opposite. And every 6 months I've wanted to give up for a different reason. And so I never pictured starting an organization. I never pictured sitting across from you doing a podcast. But what I was trying to do, and what I would say to anyone, is that it really is about baby steps and just taking that tiny next step forward. And I think for me, before this, I would get overwhelmed by the big problems in the world and think I can't impact those and I don't know how to start. And I think what we're being invited into by God is to take small steps towards one thing, and not only towards that thing, but what I've learned again and again, because I haven't been able to be attached to whether or not someone gets sober and stays sober, or whether someone gets off of the streets and stays off of the streets. I've had to have a thick skin for setbacks, and so I think learning to love the one person that God puts in front of me today, instead of feeling like I have to change everybody, because I can't. I can't even change that one person, but that faithfulness looks like loving that one person. And then what I think about is if more of us were loving that one person, because it's easy to be frozen in what to do, but if more of us were taking that one baby step towards people who maybe have different needs than we do, that just think of the collective impact that we could have.
Yeah, so there's so many things you're saying right now like resonate so much with me, because what I kept hearing from God, and I was seeking here I am, God, I've said yes, what now, right? And I was an international studies major, and it was a grander scheme for me that I had in my head, right? And it was, I need mission trips to Africa, and which is great, and that has a mission of its own, right? But I just kept hearing, move your feet, serve where you are. And I thought, I don't know what that looks like, right? I didn't know that trafficking was happening, right in my backyard, literally all of our backyards. I didn't realize I think I read this morning that it's like 26,000 people are homeless in Dallas. Does that sound right?
I think that's probably high.
Yeah?
You mean like maybe, so the official count for this year is 45, last year, 4,500.
Okay, so the article I read this morning, I need to go fact check it.
And maybe it was saying North Texas or...
Possibly. So that whole, like, the idea of there's so much work that can take place literally right here in our backyards. There are so many lives that you can impact. There are so many connections you can make. And whatever outreach you're in, whatever ministry you're in, it truly does begin with that relationship, that relational piece. I know the girls that I work with, we have lifelong relationships that we're going to be walking with. So on that, once you see and once you get in and once you realize how big of a problem this is right here in your hometown, because you grew up like right down the street from where you're doing outreach, right? How do you keep yourself from getting overwhelmed with the magnitude of that and saying, like, I'm one person, I'm a team of 4 staff? How do you keep your just going daily and seeing like a light at the end of the tunnel?
It's a good question. And I've actually been thinking about it recently, because wherever I started, almost 7 years ago to where I am today, so we're at this point today where last year we co-invested in one home with Bonton Farms. And then maybe you saw the video with Matthew, who moved into a pallet home.
Okay, pause for a sec.
Yes.
Tell us all about Bonton Farms and Matthew and what is happening there, because that is how I first learned about you, by watching that video, and a lot of my listeners and viewers don't know about what's happening. So can you tell us a little more about that?
So we've been partnering with Bonton Farms for several years now, and they are at an urban farm in South Dallas in a neighborhood called Bonton. And
which I had never heard of before.
Right, probably because there are a million small neighborhoods. And whenever I started going to the streets, I connected with the founder, Darren, and he had moved into Bonton and started learning that his neighbors were dying in their 40s and 50s, and they had these terminal diseases, and that their grandparents and parents had lived into their 80s and 90s. And so he started to ask why that was happening, and what he learned is that it was a food desert, so no grocery stores, and people had grown up on convenience store food. And so with his neighbors, they started a farm in just an empty lot next to his house that has grown into not only, I guess, maybe a few acres down the road, but also another 40 acres, 10 minutes southeast of here too. And they hire people from the community, and they have opened recently a market. And so anyway, it's all different kinds of jobs, sort of jobs that are internships as a place for people to start, and then jobs for people that are full-time and all of that. And so because they're relationally motivated, so even though they grow food, what they really say is we grow people. And because we're also relationally motivated, we aligned from a core values perspective. And so what we did with them, we now have 5 people working over at Bonton Farms, and we co-invested in a house that opened last year with them, and it's a single-family home on the front and 2 efficiency apartments on the back. So our friend Jeanette, who had been working at the farm, she moved into one of the efficiencies, and then they got these 3 pallet homes. And for people who don't know what those are, which I didn't, it's basically like a single occupancy room. It's a small structure that is just to the side of their farm, and our friend Matthew was the first person to move in there. And that's probably the video you saw.
Yes. It makes me cry every time I watch it. Like, it's amazing.
He's amazing.
It's amazing.
I love that man.
So partnering there and finding,
Well, what I was going to say is, I guess what I'm saying is when I look at the problem and it seems big, but then what I think about is that all those baby steps of the last almost 7 years, and then all the other people that have come alongside, because once again, I guess for some people it may just stay one person, but it's grown to be other people, and different people have brought their own expertise and gifts in the way they see things. And so we ended up getting to co-invest in this house, and then someone came to us last year wanting to invest in more housing for us. And there's a model outside of Austin called Community First Village, and basically that's a tiny home and RV community for the formerly homeless. 80% of the people that live there are formerly homeless, and 20% are people who have discerned a call to live missionally. And so it's people who've never experienced homelessness living alongside people who've been homeless a long time. And it's one of the most beautiful places I've ever been. And Haley and I, she's worked with me for 3 years. We went 2.5 years ago, and we both came back and thought our big dream would be to do something like that in Dallas. And so I'm trying to get to the answer to your question.
You're fine. It's a journey.
Yes. So the answer is it is a journey, and I get to slowly see different pieces, almost like unwrapping a gift. I get to slowly see, like, it was one house we invested in. Now someone wants to invest in 8 to 12 more people. And then the dream and the goal would be that one day, maybe in 5 or 10 years, there's a 300-person community that, like, we could live in, and so many people that we've loved for so long could live in. And so what I think is so beautiful is that if we can truly attend to what is small and before us and be faithful to that, you know, things beyond what we hope or imagine can happen one day. But I guess if that becomes the focus, we miss all the people along the way. Like, we miss all the relationships, and we can lose what it's actually about. So what I try to do is stay faithful to what is right in front of me and not get focused on what's not here yet. But also know that that could be a hope or a dream, and I can talk about it and know that at the right time that would come together.
And I think it goes back to, because you have people, you know, purpose is a buzzword, but it's one of my favorite words, right? Like, because you don't have to go searching externally for purpose. Like, your purpose is within you, right? And I firmly believe it begins with obedience and servanthood. And that is the truest way that you fulfill whatever purpose it is that is your unique purpose. And it comes down to the baby steps, like you're saying. It comes down to that one person that is put in front of you. I have a mentor of mine that when I first became involved with the working with traffic survivors, it was a particularly difficult season because much like what you see, you know, they may be back on the street after, you know, they've gotten off the street. They may be back in the life after they've gotten out of the life. And I, coming from my place of privilege, I didn't realize going into it that was going to be part of the journey, right? I thought, oh my gosh, you have a community of people that love you and support you, and you know, you've been, like, taken out of this lifestyle. You'll never go back.
Why would you,
right? And that was my blind eyes, goggles on. That's how I saw the world. And so when we went through a period of multiple people, like, falling back into the cycle, I remember talking with a mentor, and I was like, what are we doing? Why? Like, why am I doing this? Why am I taking time away from my family, my kids? Why? If nothing changes here, right? And he said, it's not your job to save them. It's your job to be Jesus to them when they're put in front of you for whatever time you have. So who do you go to? What's your go-to? Because I have those people I know. What's your go-to in the particularly difficult seasons? Who do you go to have life spoken into you? What do you seek out? What is your exercise that carries you through that?
Can I say one thing about what you just said?
100%.
That I think is really profound, what you just said, which is that I think as Americans, because we're so outcome focused and, you know, the American dream and everyone can kind of achieve and we're achievement oriented, that we miss the beauty of the moment that each person had. And so, like, even if they fall back into or choose that life again, that mattered, that time mattered, and it changed them. And just because they're back there, it doesn't mean that wasn't incredibly impactful, or we see it as, because they're back in that lifestyle, that maybe that is diminished. But what I'm trying to say is they carry that forward. And I believe that they're different for it. They've experienced maybe a love or an acceptance or who Christ is in a very tangible way that's not gone or lost just because they go back to something that we don't understand. Anyway, and so I guess maybe because I've had to work through that as people have relapsed or gone back out to the streets, And one thing my counselor that I go to has said is to not diminish the love that they experienced for that time, or that itself had value and meaning. I don't know if I'm explaining it well.
No, perfectly. And that's what...
Because
my mentor said the same thing.
Right.
Like, he was like, whether they graduate and live a completely restored life, or they're back on the street, you know that moment's carried with them.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Regardless.
Yes.
And that's our hopes. That's our hopes, our prayers, our dreams. And so, same thing. Your counselor's telling you the same thing, that
they're impacted and changed, even if it's not the outcome we hope for or want.
This episode is brought to you by Brandy Voth Beauty. Have you tried the #1 skincare brand in all of North America? Well, if not, today is your day. Head over to the-powerproject.com, click on Powerful Beauty, and take a 30-second skincare consultation to see what products are recommended for your skin concerns. Email yourself those results, and then I will personally mail you a thank you gift for your time. That's thepowerproject.com, Powerful Beauty.
And then, okay, your question was, who do I go to in tough times, or what do I do? I would say probably first and foremost my husband. And we've really fought for that because we've gone through some really tough times. But he is my rock, and he has, I guess, been a de facto COO for the Human Impact because our brains work very differently. And I'm like the vision future person, and he's the practical, how's this going to get done? So he asks me all the annoying questions that are necessary.
that's good. We need those people. How'd you meet your husband?
On spring break in Destin, Florida.
Oh, fun. Fun. And did he come along quickly to the idea of this work for your life?
Before this, I had a lot of different business ideas, kind of back to back to back, so no one in my family believed this was going to stick.
Okay.
Because I was always having a new idea, and so they kind of thought this is for the homeless idea. And so it took a couple of months for people to realize this was something different for me, and people were mostly afraid at first. But this is where he's really good, because I was naive and probably too trusting, and he was very much like, you can never go alone, you're never going after dark. He had all of these boundaries, and I needed someone at the time. I'd become much more street savvy, but he needed to sort of be that, help me with that in the beginning phases of the work. And yeah, so he's one person that I lean on. And then I have some dear friends who, those friendships have grown a lot over the last several years. I have an incredible counselor named Doug.
We like Doug.
He's awesome. Doug's awesome. He's who I needed for counseling because I'm a 1 on the Enneagram. And if you don't know what that is, it's a perfectionist. I didn't need someone who was going to give me a step-by-step process of like how to fix things. I needed someone who was going to ask me the more intentional questions that I was going to think about all week, and we're going to change me from the inside. And so Doug has been just the person that I needed through this journey. And then we have a small group through our church and have some older couples in it, and they really have loved on us and supported us. And then my family has been really incredible. So,
and tell me a little about your family. You talk about your business ideas. Tell me a little about your background, your upbringing.
Sure. I grew up north of where we are now.
Okay.
And it is a really affluent neighborhood. And I never had to leave that community growing up because everything's right there.
Yeah, literally everything.
Everything. And so, I was incredibly loved, but also I didn't really get to know or experience people who were different from me. And so I feel like I'm so thankful for my upbringing, and I'm so thankful now that I get other experiences and get to know my life is enriched by knowing people who have different cultural backgrounds, racial backgrounds, socioeconomic backgrounds. And I was, for a while, wondering what was the purpose of being raised in such an affluent neighborhood, because when I did realize how much need there was in our city it was this moment of like, well, why didn't I know that before? And why didn't I do anything before? Kind of those questions. And what I realized is I did have more privilege than I needed. And the purpose of that is that it's not just for me. And so the purpose is I have network and connections and opportunities that, because of where someone was born, different from me, or they might have been born in an impoverished community, or they didn't have the same opportunities as I did. And that's not fair or just, but part of working to make the world more just is me using those on their behalf, right? And so, I feel like I'm not doing a great job of explaining that either, but.
No, you totally are. It's really it's almost like a survivor guilt mentality,
yes,
right?
It is. And okay, so that has given purpose to my own story.
Yes.
It's like, before it was kind of like, I had too much. I'm confused. Why? And now I'm like, oh, this was for a purpose. I know an attorney, and my friend on the streets, they can't get an attorney for free to expunge their felony. But we have an attorney on our board, and we're doing our first felony expungement clinic next month.
Yeah.
And so because of where I grew up and the connections that afforded me, we're able to open the door for more justice for someone else. Yeah, so it's made a lot of purpose out of.
It makes it all make sense, right?
It does.
And I tell everyone, purpose is something you look back and your hindsight.
Yes.
Your hindsight can say, this was for me.
Yes.
This is why this was. This is why. And we don't have answers to all of those things, like you and I talked earlier. But we can see so much more of our journey make sense as we see it play out.
And I can be grateful for it too. And be thankful that, for the way that I was, even though it's different than other people, to appreciate that.
Yeah, because there is a sense of like pushback, right? And I know I myself, and this was a question I was getting to with you. When I first was called into the outreach that I do, I kept thinking like, God, I lived a really great life, and I encountered no abuse, and I had a warm welcome, community around me. How can I possibly empathize truly, with the women that I'm working with? And that was something I struggled with so deeply in the beginning, because a lot of people, have something from their past that leads them into the cause that they end up working with. Did you go through that? Did you go through like, how do I resonate? How do I talk? How do I communicate, right? Did you go through that, and what did you do to go through that?
For sure. I would say it took 6 months before I felt like someone really had open arms for me, because I was an outsider, and it's a mostly Black community, and it's mostly men who are in their 40s, 50s, and 60s, and I was a young white woman, and that was out of place. And unfortunately, the reverse is true. If there's a Black man in my community, that's out of place. And so there's still this sort of racial division that happens in our city, and I was in this place where it didn't make sense why I was there. And so I think there was skepticism for people, and also people were wondering, was I just trying to come fix them? And so I had to back off of my own agendas and my own solutions that I thought I was bringing to the table to really be a student of people who had grown up in poverty or who were experiencing homelessness. Because what I realized is coming with a solution when I never experienced that is actually pretty arrogant of me. And so I quickly learned I need to lay aside what I thought I was coming to do and truly listen. And then this man named Sharon Brown, he goes by Mr. B, I feel like he was the first person who really opened his arms to me and really saw me and realized she doesn't know what she's doing. But I'm going to love her anyway. And it's so funny because it's almost like the reverse of what I thought was going to happen happened, where I thought I was going to help. And instead, the community slowly started to embrace and love me. And what God did is use them to heal me and teach me to love myself, because they accepted me just for who I was, something that I was talking about earlier. And so the first couple of years, I really felt like, people were like, I can't believe you do that. I can't believe you hang out with homeless people. And I was kind of like, but it's for me.
Yeah.
Like the Lord is healing me and changing me. And anyway, I almost feel like that had to happen before I could begin to be effective, because everything that we have done has come from listening. There's this one, I had a great idea, I thought, early on. I saw the neighborhood was covered with trash, and so I thought, I'll organize some volunteers, and we're going to go pick up the trash, and we're going to have the homeless pick up the trash with us, because they're going to want to take ownership for their community, and right, I was putting all these narratives on them. And we got out that Saturday, and it was a lot of great volunteers, and only like 2 people who were homeless came with us to pick up trash. And so I was analyzing it after, being like, well, that didn't work. And apparently they didn't want to clean up trash with us. But it was this aha moment for me, and I had so many of these early on of, I never asked them what they wanted. Like, why don't next week we go out there and actually ask people, what do you want? If we're going to bring people down on a Saturday, what would you need? And the thing we heard the most was haircuts. And so for years now, we've done this thing called Street Side Salon, which is haircuts for people experiencing homelessness outside. We, crank up some generators, and we all share a meal together. So one thing that we do is we try to break down the dividing lines, and it's unconscious, but I think even when we're serving behind a table, there's a power differential that happens. And so what we want to do is we want to have people who are homeless and people who aren't serving alongside each other, and all of us eating together. And at times we've had homeless stylists cut hair alongside people who aren't homeless. And so even in our events that we're doing, trying to break down those lines and just allow people to encounter each other as a fellow human being.
I think that's awesome. I love the street side haircuts. Do you have, I was reading or listening or heard of someone that has like a mobile unit. Is that, do you guys have that? No?
We don't.
Have you heard of this? Do you know what I'm talking about? Like they have like a mobile salon that they go do like street side. And I'm not, is that in Dallas or?
There might be one here. I think there's definitely one in New York City. I don't know exactly where it is.
I know. I can't remember where I heard about it or read about it, but I was like, that is the coolest thing ever. Like, I want to find, I'm going to go find the founder of that. We'll interview her on the podcast.
Perfect.
Yeah.
She's next.
Yeah. And so I observed today, because in the capacity that I serve is a restoration piece, right, in an aftercare home. But I have, the majority of my girls have spent time on the streets, homeless in shelters. And so I really wanted to observe and take it in today and just see the interaction of you guys and your staff and your volunteers. And you, the first man that we spoke with today, he asked, what are you doing? What are you giving? And you said, well, I get a lot from my relationships here. I'm giving friendship. And I thought that was incredible. I thought that was so great. And everyone today was very warm and very friendly and very receptive. But how often do you have the pushback? How often do you have the ones that don't want you there? And how do you handle that?
It's a good question. Initially it was 90% of the people held me at arm's length and didn't seem like they wanted me there, or were pretty suspicious as to why I was there. And I don't blame them looking back. And over time, because I've been going to, and now we've been going to the same neighborhood for almost 7 years, we aren't just known by individuals, but by the community. And so I do feel like there's like a big warm hug we get. Not every time we go out, but I feel like we are loved by people out there. And so then there's, I'll call him Joe, but there's this guy Joe who, he was in line for the shelter one day, and I'd seen him for many years, and one day he said, I want to work and I don't have any complicating issues and I fall through the cracks. There's help for people who have all these deeper issues, but I don't have them. And so I said, well, why don't we talk more about that? And our next step with people is we take them for coffee or lunch, and we try to get more of their story and ask them what their own vision for their life is, and then determine what those obstacles are, and then we tackle one at a time. And so he started coming, and one of his other friends started coming with him, and we've been meeting with them regularly and figured out that some of their root causes are legal reasons. And so we've engaged an attorney to work with us, or work with them, to help address those issues. And that's kind of been our first step with them. But he's pretty skeptical still, and he is very impatient with the process, which doesn't really make sense to me, because he's been out there for many years and we're just 3 months in and we are making progress. But there's sometimes no reasoning with people in general.
Yeah. In general.
Yeah. So with him, I just feel like he wants to be skeptical, and I can't convince him that we are making progress. And when I saw him out on Tuesday, he literally didn't talk to me, and it hurt. And it's weird too, because it's one thing, okay, you don't want our help, I understand that, but I'm still a human being. Like, I'm a person, and I actually care about you, and we are friends. I mean, you might want to cut me out now, but it was a weird moment of like, you are rejecting the help, but you're also rejecting me. And so that's painful still, because we are so relational, and I truly care about him, Joe, who's not really Joe, but I truly care about him, and I want him to know he's loved, and that we're willing to be his friend, even if he doesn't want to walk this path with us. But I guess an imagination I can have for him that I couldn't have with people at the beginning, because I've seen this story play out, is even though today he may not be talking to me, we'll stay consistent, and we're going to continue extending love to him, and he can choose to reject it as long as he wants. But I often see people's defenses wear down after a certain amount of time. And so I know this story isn't finished. And it's sort of like with relapses. When people used to relapse, it would be so heartbreaking and devastating, and kind of that question of, why am I doing what I'm doing? It doesn't work. Or it works for a time and then it doesn't work. But I've seen enough of those stories play out to know that the relapse is only one point in that person's story. And so with my friend Joe, I have this imagination of, okay, you're angry at me today and you're rejecting me today, but I have a picture of 3 months from now. Maybe you're sitting down with me again and you're in a different place. And maybe he's not. But I can know that this tiny moment, even though it does hurt right now, it's not the end of the story.
So your kids are younger. I kind of look at it like teenagers. Okay?
Which we're not there.
I'm like, wait, this is making sense to me.
Oh, that's cool.
Because you're going to love them, like, even when they are mad at you.
Yes.
Even when they behave really poorly.
Yes.
Even when you know that you've taught them better, right? You're still going to love them.
Yes.
And the hope is, and I think, I don't have daughters, so I think about, like, my dad and myself, and literally we would have been fine if we didn't see each other for several years when I was a teenager. But I tell all of my friends with teenage daughters, they're going to love you again. I promise you, like, that they're going to come back. They're going to remember what you've done for them. So you kind of have to look at it like with a teenager, right? Like, maybe the relationship comes back and it's great. Maybe it's a little fragmented, but this is the season that we're in, and you're going to love them, and you're going to show up regardless of, because you can't change his behavior. You can't make him receive something he doesn't want to receive.
No. And I think I've also grown, though, because I would have felt like I didn't know what to do in that space, but I think I've grown, and I would call it maybe thicker skin. First of all, I'm more savvy on the streets, and I can discern better, like, what people are really wanting or asking. So that's one thing. But this thing is, this guy Joe, in the past I would have not known what to do with it. But the next time I see him, if it's the right time, and maybe it won't be, but I'm going to say to him, hey, I'm still a person. And, like, it hurts when you don't even say hi to me. And he may be a jerk then, too. I don't know. But I am going to take that next step and try to remind him, he may not want my help, but I'm still a person, and I still have feelings. Like, I'm just like him. And so I'm interested to see where that interaction leads us. He may further reject me or ignore me, or maybe that will impact him. But that's something I need to share with him. I need to tell him, like, I hurt when you don't treat me like a human being.
Well, and I think that's how you forge a true relationship, right? Because it's kind of that story about that I've heard where there were these two women, and one woman was helping the other, and she was always there for that one. And then one day the woman said, are we friends? Because you don't ever share your pain with me. You know, you're here to help me, but you don't share your pain with me. I didn't know we were actually friends.
Wow.
And so I think that speaks volumes of your growth in your journey, building relationships.
Yes.
Because I would be like, okay, Joe doesn't want to talk to me today. Like, it hurts my feelings, but I'm not going to tell him my feelings are hurt because he's on the street and I have a house, right? Like, that would be in my mind.
Right.
That I don't get to tell you that you hurt my feelings.
Right.
But I think that's where your true bond, your true relationship
and
is
that's
formed.
Yes, and because people who are homeless are used to being treated a certain way, that's surprising to them too, I think often. But what you just said, because it's oftentimes people of privilege coming to serve the homeless, we don't know we can relate to them in such a human way. And so getting to do that teaches them something about me too. And, people sometimes when we go down there, if they don't know us, they'll basically say, like, what are you here for? Or what are you here to give me? And that, what you mentioned earlier, what I like to say is, like, I'm not only here to give, but I'm here to receive. And we all have something to offer. And I think people who are homeless are so used to being the recipients of things. And just this reminder, and some of them know it, but maybe some of them have forgotten, but you have as much to offer as I have to offer. Even though it may look different right now, you may be resource poor, but when I first came to the streets, I was spiritually poor. And so there's a spiritual depth to so many of my friends on the streets that I never expected. And one of the things that it really does still stop me in my tracks, because it's so sincere, is I'll see someone out there and I'll say, how are you doing? And they'll say, I'm blessed. Like, I'm blessed to wake up today, or this is what God did for me. And it humbles me and it challenges me every single time, because they have nothing and they should be angry and cursing God. And I have seen people with more than they could ever want or need, and they're still hungry for more. And what it's taught me is it really isn't what we have. It's how grateful we are for the gifts that God has given us. And I know it's this kind of buzz thing of practicing gratefulness, but I've had 2 miscarriages. And in my first miscarriage, I was in this really low place, and I had a friend talk about practicing gratefulness. And so one of my practices in the early grief cycle was waking up every day and telling God 10 things I was grateful for. And what I realized is how much it changed my perspective, because it kept me from focusing. What had happened is the loss had become so big, but what it did is it didn't take away the loss, but it helped me realize how many good and beautiful things were still in my life and how many gifts were still in my life. And the homeless have been the people that have probably taught me that the most, because they choose to focus on, most of them choose to focus on the good and beautiful things God has for them. And they have so much to offer us there.
I think gratitude is huge. I mean, and I don't care if we call it a buzzword or what. 100%, like, that's what keeps everything running. And that's what keeps your focused. And I heard you today share with one of the men, he asked what you needed from him, and you shared with him about your miscarriage. And I thought, wow, like, that is, you're in true relation, right? And we talk about, we love, like, God's love is both horizontal and vertical. And I watched you share with him about your miscarriage, and him, offer to pray with you. And that was a really great depiction of how you're loving horizontally, but how you're also being loved horizontally. Like, it was huge. I didn't expect it. It was very unexpected. And people knew about your kids. They asked about your kids and how old they were. So do you bring your family in? Do your husband and your kids come with you? Yeah? And do you what does the rest of your family have to say about that? Is everyone, like, at this point, are they just like, that's what Elisabeth does and we're good? Or
my family's all in. So, like, they're good. There are people in my community of origin who still don't understand. And even, like, chastise me, like when I was pregnant, like, I'm risking my child's life or my children's lives when I go to the streets. And I guess I thought a lot about that, and I thought a lot about protecting myself and my children. And when I was pregnant with our son, so our first child, when I was pregnant with him, I guess it was 5 years ago, because he's 4.5, I felt an incredibly new weight and sense of responsibility. And I did have to weigh, am I still willing to take the risks that I'm taking, knowing that I'm in charge of this life? And it wasn't an easy choice, like, meaning I really wrestled with it. And where I landed was, first of all, I'm more alive than I've ever been. And so he's going to get a mom who's, like, fully living. And that's worth a lot. But then second is I want our children, we want our family to be in close proximity with people who are different from us, who have different needs, who have different stories. And so I'm willing for us to take that risk. And it's a very guarded risk, meaning what I'm saying is we're being smart about how we're doing that. But I'm willing to do that because there's so much life. Mm-hmm. And I had been risk averse before, but I think one of the ways that Satan keeps us bound is by keeping us afraid from, we only think of the negatives that could come with a risk, and we miss how much life is on the other side too. And so I have such an enriched life, and my kids have such an enriched life, and the joy that they give my friends on the streets, and almost like the ownership they feel for my kids too. Our daughter turned 1 on New Year's Day, and just getting to share that joy with them and show them a picture of her. And anyway, they followed her, and our friends over at Bonton Farms being like, you've got to bring her back down. And so I guess you're hearing my own journey, because I think people just assume that maybe I haven't thought about it, or when there's that criticism, and it's like, no, I've thought a lot about it. And I don't think there's an easy answer, but I know that I want this life more than the one I had. And I know I want it for our whole family, and not just for myself.
No, I think that's solid. I mean, really solid, because I had trepidation and hesitation going in, because I thought I have young children, and there was fear. There was fear of, am I introducing my kids into a life? Am I bringing risks into the life that don't need to be brought? And at the end of the day, if we really truly want to impact societal change, it can't end with you. It can't end with me. It can't end with an organization. It has to be carried generationally and passed generationally down. And the same way that we were taught to stay in a box and stay away from the scary things, we have to teach our children to take part in the vision, right? And 100%, it's a family mission in our house. And like you said, we're smart about it. We're not going to put our kids in imminent danger.
No.
But I think it's all part of that relational piece. And you couldn't do what you're doing without your husband's support and without your kids' involvement. And also, the other part of me says, if this is the purpose that God's placed on my life, and this is what he's put in my soul, how could that be a piece that I don't share with the ones closest to me that I love the most? Right?
I don't think you can, and be authentic to who you are.
And just think about the legacy that you're building for your children, that they get to grow up knowing a world where people are from all backgrounds, and they get to have friends that don't look like them, don't live like them. What is the greatest lesson that you want your kids to know in life?
Wow. The greatest lesson. Well, I now also have a spiritual director, and I was just not only counselor, but a spiritual director. I need a lot of help.
You have to. You have to.
But I was talking to her today, and one of the things I want my children to most remember about their upbringing is I want them to remember that we played. And I think that's really specific to my personality type. Once again, the perfectionist type. Because if I get lost in that world of perfection, I can miss the moments of play. And so I want them to remember that I got down and dirty with them. Like, I got on the floor. My son and I, we walked to a lake near our house yesterday, and we got there not by way of the road, but by way of the ravine, because he saw the ravine, and it was amazing to see that through his eyes. And so that's what I want them to remember, I guess, sort of internally from a home perspective. And from a bigger perspective, even related to my work, I think I want them to know that following that purpose that is within them is worth the risk, so that they would not let fear drive them or prevent them from walking out that purpose that God's put in their little bodies, and that they would know that fear is part of the journey, and that they wouldn't let all of the fear, all of the risk, all of the negatives maybe outweigh pursuing that purpose for which they're made.
Mm-hmm.
And that they would see my husband and me being willing to take risks and do things that are out of the box for us, and they look very different.
Mm-hmm.
Because he's in the business world and I'm in the nonprofit world, we have very different callings on our lives.
Mm-hmm.
But that they would get to see that it doesn't matter if you're called to one space or another, there's not a better or worse, but are you willing to take those chances and continue to pursue that path no matter what comes?
I love that.
So that they would be brave and courageous people.
Love that. And that the risk is worth it.
The risk is worth it.
I love that.
And that we would, that wouldn't just be something that they have to do at 25 and it's like ripping a Band-Aid off, but that they would have over time taken small risks,
Mm-hmm.
that we would have given them the space to do that within our home,
Mm-hmm.
and to learn and to fail and to grow, so that by the time that there's that big risk to take of a new job that takes you away, or going to the streets, or whatever that risk is for them, that it would not be as scary maybe, because they would have been learning what that process looks like.
You said earlier that you were typically like risk averted.
Yes.
So was I. I was safe bet Sally.
Yes.
All my life.
Yes.
And I'm curious because my husband is the risk taker of the family.
Mm-hmm.
So is your husband that way? Does he like pull that out of you?
No.
No?
He's not a risk taker.
No. Okay.
I mean, in certain ways, like he goes skydiving and no thank you.
No. No.
And he likes roller coasters and no thank you.
Uh-huh.
So, I mean, in certain ways, he's more that, I think. But I think we're both, sorry to keep going back to the Enneagram, but he's a 6.
Uh-huh.
And so they're
We don't apologize for the Enneagram
Okay, good.
over here.
Okay, good.
We are thrilled to know that God created us this way for a reason.
He's a 6, and they can be worst case scenario thinkers.
Uh-huh.
So he's always thinking through what might go wrong.
Okay.
So it's been beautiful to watch him grow in his own purpose and be willing to take risks himself, because that is really him pushing back against, some things that are natural to him that he learned to cope.
Yeah.
And so I've been amazed to watch him in his own way take his own risks.
Yeah.
And step out in faith.
Yeah.
And the beauty that's come from that.
Do you have any upcoming risks you have to take this year?
Oh, great question. Yes. I think the big new things we're doing this year feel like a risk, like our first felony expunction clinic next month, because we have these attorneys who are going to jump in, and I think they can do like 20 in one, or begin the process for 20 in one night.
Wow.
And it's like, well, what if we go to the streets and only one person wants to do this? And so I think it's this thing of, we go for the one, but it's sort of this fear thing of, wow, we have all these people behind us, and what if we can't deliver?
What if I have all these resources and I don't?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then I think getting to walk alongside these real estate developers who are wanting to do a bigger housing development, that feels like risk, because we've never done something on that scale before. And I have become very comfortable with what I would have used to termed failure. Because, like, let's say the felony clinic, only one person shows up that night, and only one process is started. We're always doing sort of a post-mortem and asking the questions like, what could we have done differently? Or, like, maybe what could they have done differently, even though we can't control that, just sort of assessing what that is. And we get to do something different next time. So once again, it's this idea of playing the long game. That may be one person for the first felony expungement clinic, but maybe next time we tell them 3 months early, and they've seen one person who's actually had their felony taken away. And so then next time 15 people show up. And so I know that we're going to trip up along the way, and that things aren't going to go the way that we hope or want, but that it's not about that specific moment. What can we take away and learn from that to make us better for the future?
Yeah, so I think that failure is something that, like, so many people are so afraid of. And I wish that we could just rename it. Like, I wish we could just rename it like learning lesson.
Or if someone just wants to come hang out with us, you just want to get out of your system. Because I feel like failure is just so common to our experience. You're right, it doesn't even feel like failure anymore.
Yeah.
Not in the way it used to hold. Failure used to hold all this weight and this negativity, and now it's just kind of like, in some way this is going to fail. It's not going to go the way I hope, but I'm going to learn from it, and we're going to grow because of it. And it doesn't scare me anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a lot to be said for a 1 on the Enneagram.
A lot.
Like, huge.
A lot.
If I've grown no way in life, I've learned how to fail really well.
Yes,
Yeah.
we're a really good failure.
This has been amazing.
Thank you so much, Brandy.
I've appreciated your time.
Same.
And for anyone that wants to be involved, follow along your story. However, let everyone know how they can contact you,
Sure.
find you, get involved.
Sure. So we're called The Human Impact, and our website is thehumanimpact.org. And there you can subscribe to our blog. We send stories out every week. You can follow us on Instagram, The Human Impact, there to Facebook. And Amanda, she's our storyteller, so she's pushing out content consistently. If you're in the Dallas area, we'd love for you to come join us on the streets.
Yeah, it's not hard. It's really easy. Show up at a coffee shop and you go out and hang out with people.
So any way that anyone would like to get involved, we'd love to have you.
Okay, and I'll put all that in the show notes so that everyone can hang out with you and follow you, and I'm going to keep following you.
Thank you for this, and thank you for coming with us.
It won't be the last time.
That was really special.
It was good.
So come again, yes.
I will.
Oh man, you guys, my favorite part about this show is the amazing women that I get to meet every single week. I love hearing their stories, and I love bringing their stories to you guys. I certainly hope that you're inspired to go out and lead your own purpose-filled lives after listening to these guests week in and week out. If you are inspired by something you've heard in this show, can I ask a favor? Can you go, please, write a review, make sure you're subscribed to the podcast, give us a rating, we'll take 5 stars if you're feeling generous, and then tell all your friends about us so that we can continue to bring you these guests. And by the way, are you hanging out with us on Instagram? Because you should be. It's at @the_power project. Check us out. As always, I hope that you enjoyed this show, and I cannot wait to chat with you next week. But until then, you guys go out and lead your best purpose-filled lives.